You are listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent Talk.
Well, happy Thursday evening, folks. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to my program, the Intrepid radio program, right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. Hasn't changed since yesterday. And you can also watch this video simulcast of this program over on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. Join the Intrepid family over there in the live chat room. You're going to find it's a very enjoyable place to be during the show. You can share your ideas, throw in your 2 cents worth, or talk about other things. So have a good time over there. Join us over there on my YouTube channel. And tonight, we're going to do what we've been doing all week since last Friday, and we're going to be talking a little bit more about the Jinn. I don't think this topic could grow old, because there is so much information out there, but I want to cover a couple of angles that we haven't really talked about. I'm going to get into a few more of the military stories a little later on in this broadcast, probably not until the second half. I want to get into some other stories that are out there, but I want to talk about that thing I kind of hinted at yesterday, in which a couple of people asked me, and that is about possession by the Jinn. We have heard from many quarters over the years, just the little bits that I was even learning about the Jinn over the years, was that they're very dangerous. They're very dangerous because they are actually what we encounter as the demonic. Now, the demonic is what we encounter in the literalist Orthodox Western Christian version of spirituality. We get demons, devils, Satan, angels, all of those things. In the Arabic tradition, theology, it's not really theology, I don't want to call it that. Spirituality, their tradition. There were no devils or demons, as we've talked about already. There were angels, there were humans, and there were jinn. And jinn are kind of those in-between. And they can be good, they can be evil, they can be benevolent, they can be harsh, they can be tricksters. And so all of this stuff starts to add up. Are we encountering jinn when we encounter demons? Are they one and the same, just different labels on them? And so I wanted to go through and talk about some of these things. What are the jinn? The jinn are spirits. They can eat. They can drink, they can sleep, they can have sex, they can even die. So that makes them a little different than what you might think as strictly a spirit. Can a ghost die? Can a demon be killed? Here is the question. So we in Western culture, from Disney's Aladdin to the subject of exorcisms, jinn spirits have influenced our culture and our religion for centuries in our realms and in theirs. Now, what you've got to really come down to when you start thinking about all of this is, do I believe the jinn are actual beings? Do they exist? Do they not exist simply because we cannot microscopically test them in a lab by the scientific method? Science cannot prove that jinn exist. They claim they don't exist because there is no way to qualify it. So it becomes belief, it becomes psychological. It becomes theological and religious and spiritual. All those are the reasons why we tend to, as a society that's more or less governed by science, we start to cast these things aside, and we say they don't exist. If we get sick or you see somebody who is mentally ill, we say we have found ways with science to determine how the brain is making that happen in a person. How a physical reaction in chemicals in the body makes certain things happen. Same in the brain. But is there any source that goes deeper than that? Is there a spiritual source? Can you say that somebody who is mentally ill is somebody who is affected by the jinn or by a demon or by some ill spirit in this world? Or is it just simply physical? Because that's all the farther we can go. Those are the boundaries we reach with the scientific method. Now, the scientific method and science try to eschew, let's push through superstition, let's push through spiritual belief and get to the core of the matter, what really exists there. And the big question is, by pushing the spiritual aside, are they finding the things that happen in the mind and the body that cause physical and mental ailments, but are they not finding the source, which might be a veil we cannot pierce? So I have to straddle the fence a little bit on this, although I say I sometimes fall over into the spiritual, the theological, the religious, the supernatural side of things because of experiences I've had. And that's why I bring up rather facetiously, I'm not a nut job. I know how my mind works, and I know that it's not a psychological trick of my mind to believe these things. So my experience, which is anecdotal when it comes to scientific method, but my experience has dictated a lot of what I tend to end up believing about something. So let's look at this a little bit. Some of this will be a little recap from other nights that we've talked about this, but there was an Arab poet, Qutayr of the Umayyad period from 661 to 750. He was known for depicting his romantic obsession with a married woman, once described how he became a poet. He said, "One day a man on horseback came toward me until he was next to me. I looked at him. He was bizarre, a man made out of brass. He said to me, 'Recite some poetry.' Then he recited poetry to me. I said, 'Who are you?' He said, 'I am your double from the Jinn.' That is how I started reciting poetry," so says this fellow. Now, the Jinn are shape-shifting spirits. They're made of fire and air, with origins in pre-Islamic Arabia. They're the inspiration, of course, for Aladdin's genie, which comes from 1001 Night. Was it 1001 Arabian Nights? Is that the actual title? Or 1,000 Arabian Nights? Whatever it is. So they held a space in Arab culture for almost as long as Arab culture itself existed, and yet having transcended both religion and the physical world, so little is understood about these spirits. People in the West currently are more interested to learn about jihad, the veil, the status of women in Islam, and the various fundamentalist movements, wrote Amir El-Zain in her book, Islam, Arabs, and the Intelligent World of the Jinn. They assume, she says, that the Jinn is a topic better left to Disney and popular culture, or at best to anthropologists. See, we so focus on the politics of the Arab world right now because of its extremists that we miss, frankly, a lot of the beauty of the ancient Arabic world and a lot of their stories and their culture. And so we miss all of that because we are so overridden by the extremist terrorist camp in the Islamic culture and in the Arabic cultures. And I have said this many times, Rocky and I talked about this a bit on the Situation Room, is that you take away the maniacal leaders in some of these countries, and you're going to be left with the people who would like nothing more than to blend with us, than to know us, than to enjoy sharing art and sharing culture. So we miss that stuff because of the politics. But Jinn, who are part of Islam but not worshipped in it, with their free will and obscurity, have too much to teach us about a culture, a people, and their multiple religions to be forgotten. Neither inherently good nor bad. The Jinn are amorphous entities. They're able to take shape of humans and animals alike. Their role in society, too, has been malleable. It's changeable. It's shiftable. The Jinn have served as a source of inspiration for both the most esteemed classical Arab poets in the first millennium and Disney in 1992, and again in the remake of Aladdin just last year. The Jinn, the genie, is a singular form of Jinn, but both before and after its introduction, which included mentions of Jinn in the Quran, Jinn have remained an inexplicable entity. The Orthodox scholars say you can't understand jinn. That's the Orthodox, the fundamental, if you will, Islamic scholars. So you can't understand them. Arabic literature researcher Sunila Mubaye tells this. I was reading her quote, and sorry, I mixed that up. So it was Sunila Mubaye who said the Orthodox scholars say you can't understand the jinn. Whew! And they all died. All right, got that out. Now, still, despite the mysterious nature of the jinn, there are some things that historians, Islamic scholars, and believers of jinn have come to discern about the spirits. According to El-Zain, pagan Arabs, believe it or not, they exist, pagan Arabs, worshipped jinn long before Islam was introduced into the 7th century. They believed that the spirits were masters of certain crafts and elements of nature who had the power to turn plots of land fertile. Jinn are believed to both interact with humans in our reality and lead their own lives in a separate realm. As spiritual entities, the jinn are considered dual-dimensional, with the ability to live and operate in both in both manifest physical and invisible domains. Now, El-Zain writes this: the jinn are considered dual-dimensional, with the ability to live and operate in both manifest and in invisible dreams. Her language, there's something with the translation there that I've stumbled over that twice now. She talked about the jinn's influence has been widespread, both religiously and culturally, in pre- and post-Islamic Arabia. So this isn't just an entity found in the Quran or in Islam. It existed in Arabic culture much earlier than that. They can talk or otherwise communicate with people through some, like poets, who are more likely than others to be hit up by a genie. The ancient Arabs, known for their affinity for poetry, even coined the term shair, meaning an Arabic literature poet who was supernaturally inspired by the jinn, the shair, and to designate poets like Qutayr Azza. Poets in pre-Islamic Arabia often said they had a special genie that was their companion, these poets. Says Mubayi, sometimes they would attribute their verses to the jinn. It would be much like the biblical writers attributing their writings to God, an inspiration of God. The early the early Arabic cultures, their artists, their writers, their poets would attribute their writings to the jinn. And so I think that's a very interesting comparison. In the early 7th century, when the Islamic prophet Muhammad began spreading the word of the Quran, he shared multiple surahs or verses that mentioned jinn, including one named entirely after the spirits. Belief in the jinn has been part of the world's second largest religion ever since. El-Zain argues that one can't be Muslim if he or she doesn't have faith in the jinn and in their existence, because they are mentioned in the Quran and prophetic tradition. And by the way, I said earlier, let's make sure I don't sound like I'm contradicting myself. I said that the jinn were not sourced in the Quran. It's not part of the theology, the earliest mention of jinn. But they are mentioned in the Quran. They are part of some of the theology and superstitious and religious beliefs of Islam, even though they pre-existed, they predated Islam. And so El-Zain argues that one can't be a Muslim unless they have faith in the jinn and their existence. And while, of course, not all who identify as Muslim subscribe to every word of the Quran literally, if El-Zain is right, it means that around 1.6 billion people in the world believe in jinn. Now, jinn are considered part of the al-Gharib, I'm pronouncing that wrong, al-Ghaib, or the unseen. As invisible entities with abstract definitions, belief in them manifests differently between communities and individuals. For instance, while some Islamic scholars agree that jinn are capable of possession, others do not. Still, in both the past and present, stories of those possessed by the jinn aren't hard to find. There are exorcisms which can involve reciting the Quran over a person, or more rarely, physically beating the jinn out of them. And they're performed in some circles on those thought to be possessed by jinn, despite being condemned by mainstream Muslims. So people who partake in the latter believe that the pain is not felt by the person who the genie occupies, but the jinn themselves, much like Christian exorcism. The pain inflicted is inflicted upon the demon, not on the physical person. And so the Arabs of pre-Islam invented a whole set of exorcism procedures to protect themselves from the evil actions of the jinn on their bodies and their minds, such as the use of beads. You'll see, when I go over to Egypt, I see a lot of our Muslim, our drivers, our workers, they all have these beads. You'd think of them as being like a rosary, and when they're driving the car, and I think of that most commonly. That's where I encounter a lot of just the common guys. They'll drive us around hanging from the rearview mirror, or wrapped around their wrist in their hand and in the palm of their hand. And so they have these beads. They have incense. They have bones. They have salts and charms written in Arabic, Hebrew, and Syriac, or the hanging around their necks of dead animals' teeth, such as a fox or a cat, to frighten the jinn and to keep them away. In Arabic, the word majnun, meaning possessed or mad or insane, literally means, in literal translation, to be possessed by a genie. Majnun, which means insane. And so, despite stories of possession, jinn are remarkable in their propensity towards neither good nor evil. In Christianity, demons and evil spirits appear as entities carrying out Satan's maleficent wishes, but neutral spirits, like the jinn, have no place. El-Zain believes that jinn have been robbed of the scholarly devotion they deserve, in part because they complicate the narrative of monotheism. Did you catch that? Because yesterday we had some of these questions. I know in the chat room, Leslie, you asked the question, could I be possessed by a jinn just by listening to this? I don't think so. I don't think they are possessors as much as they are influencers and manipulators. So, but they complicate the narrative of monotheism, which means to believe in the existence of intelligent spiritual entities without necessarily demonizing them. So jinn, different than both angels and the devil, oscillate between good and evil. We hear this about the fae and the fairy folk and the elementals, that they do the same thing. They can be very good and benevolent. They can be very bad and evil. All depends on the day you catch them or the mood they might be in. They don't have a preset, predetermined mood or a mode of operation. And they can fuck up. Pardon me for gentle ears here. That's how I've written it down here. They can be pious. They can help us or they can hurt us, as shown in folk tales from 1001 Nights, commonly known as English's Arabian Nights. And in one of these tales, The Fisherman and the Genie, the inspiration for Disney's Aladdin, a fisherman pulls a bottle out of the sea. When he opens it, a genie appears. Angry to have been trapped in the bottle for centuries, the genie tells the fisherman their plan to kill him. But after the two exchange stories, the genie changes their mind, instead bestowing the fisherman with a life of good fortune. Now, fluid in form and interpretation, jinn not only possess and converse with us, but they can also fall in love or have sex with humans. Pre-Islamic poet Tabata Sharan once wrote about sleeping with a jinnaya, the female form of a Jinn, in a poem called How I Met the Ghoul, Ghul. And his poem says this: I lay upon her through the night, that in the morning I might see what had come to me. Behold, 2 eyes and a hideous head, like the head of a cat, split-tongued, legs like a deformed fetus, the back of a dog, clothes of haircloth or worn-out skins. According to El Zayn, the ability or desire to have sex isn't all Jinn have in common with humans like us. Jinn eat, they drink, they sleep, they procreate, and they can die. And as she says, through their mortal lives, they can extend for thousands of years. And yet, while we can relate to the spirits on many levels, the consensus remains that we fully cannot comprehend the Jinn, though we try. And that's what I do with this show and other this string of shows I've been doing, is to try to find ways to understand who these Jinn are. Are they the evil creatures? Are they the benevolent creatures? Who are they? What are they? What do they do? What effect can they have on us? Can they possess us? When I talk of my own stories and I talk about how Sarah Soderlin contacted me and asked if I'm inviting something in, doesn't necessarily mean in to possess, but I'm inviting it into my world, into my sphere of influence. And what influence does it have over me? What manipulation can it have? So this is where we have to be diligent about what we believe when we encounter things, if you are open to these things at all. Some of us are so closed, I don't think we have to worry about it so much. So the Jinn, I'm very interested in the Jinn, especially since I believe my own experience supports having encountered one. Now, am I going to open myself up for some kind of manipulation? Hopefully no, because I know how to prevent that from happening. Does that mean I don't feel their presence? No. We can feel their presence. So I think it's interesting. I don't recommend anybody go out there and willy-nilly say, I am open to the Jinn, or to demons, or to evil influence of any kind. You don't want to keep yourself opened up to that, because that can affect who you are and how you act. Is there possession? Yeah, but I don't think it's by the Jinn so much. I do think that there is an evil, a demonic cast that exists in the spirit realm. The Jinn are immortal mortals, if you will, on a very different level than we are. And so I don't have my fingers solidly on the solid go-to answer for these things, but from what I'm gleaning, the Jinn have the power to influence, to manipulate. They could have the power to kill you if they so chose, but that power is also something that we can control by the way we act toward them. And so there's still a lot more to soak up on this. I want to get into reading a few more of the military stories that are out there, and some of the other things. We'll do that after the break. I wish I could answer these questions more solidly, more specifically, more assuredly, but this is what I'm starting to glean. So anyway, you guys sit there for a couple of minutes. We'll be right back after this break. All right, folks, thanks for sitting through that break. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to my show, the Intrepid radio program, right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com to see all the goodness that is Odyssey. And you can also come over and listen and watch this simulcast over on my YouTube channel. And that is youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. There's not a lot of exciting things to watch, other than me maybe scratching my nose every now and then, or losing eye contact, whatever it might be. But sometimes we show some fun pictures. The best part about this video stream over on YouTube is that you can join the live chat room and discuss this show as it's happening. So come on over, view the show and simulcast video, and join the other Intrepids in the live chat room. And that's over at youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. And by the way, if you would like to get a tarot reading, you know I do those things. Go on over to my website, scottallenroberts.com. And that's Allen is A-L-A-N. I always got to spell that out because it's so many different ways to spell Allen. scottallenroberts.com. Click on the tarot link and choose one of the two different readings you want. We'll get you all booked in the schedule. So no, thank you in advance for that. Also, just want to announce Sunday mornings, I do a show that's off the Odyssey Radio, off of Odyssey Radio. It's just right here in my YouTube chat room, and that's It's Sunday at 9 a.m. in the morning, 9 a.m. Central Standard Time. That's 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 a.m. Western, or Pacific, or left, well, whatever you want to call the left coast. So that's for you, Audrey. And so come on over and join us on Sunday mornings. We do, many times we do tarot readings for those in the chat room who want to have when we do 2 and 3 card readings. So come on over, enjoy that on Sunday morning. And now let's get back into the Jinn. We were talking about trying to establish more about the Jinn. Who are they? Are they dangerous to us? Is any being that exists in that spirit plane that is basically immortal, immortal, they can die, so is that really immortal? They're immortal-like, that have powers, that can exhibit power over us. Are they to be feared? I think, yeah, anybody in that position is. Anything in that position is. And so we have to be very careful with how we approach it. I think talking about the subject, researching it, isn't necessarily going to open you up to experiencing it. I think there are other spiritual things you have to delve into and be looking for in order to encounter a Jinn. Wesselman, who we talked about a few days ago, and his experience at Medinat Habu in Luxor, in the temple there, the ancient temple, in those ruins, he encountered a Jinn because he was open to it. And so he encountered, I don't know if he invoked it at all, but he was there, and he saw it, and he conversed with it. He had its name. It gave him its name, and he was able to take some power over the situation because of that. So there are other experiences we've read about. And now, many stories you read, we can take a ghost story and we can, pare it down all the way down to the brass tacks of being something that's misunderstood many times. You didn't see a ghost, you saw, for lack of a better thing to grasp on, you saw a headlight reflecting in the mirror, reflecting on the wall, which made it look like something white or shadowy was passing behind you. Is that a ghost? No. Now, the problem is that there are thousands, hundreds of thousands of ghost stories, and they can't all be just tricks of the eye. And there are many people out there like me who have had experiences, maybe like you, who know that there are other ways that somebody might explain it away, but explaining it away doesn't eradicate it, because there are lots of things that look like lots of things. The skeptical mind is going to want to flee from it. They're going to want to find any other explanation that doesn't fit under the category of explainable, quantifiable science. And many times those veils can't be pierced by science. So when you experience those things, you are experiencing something of a spiritual nature. Sorry, skeptics. It's just the way it is. And you can't always explain everything. So I want to talk about some of these strange military encounters again. I gave us a couple of them yesterday, and we talked about them, and I've got a list of them here that I was going through. I want to see, let's see, where did we get into these experiences? They were sitting on the balcony of the second floor was the one we talked about, and they shined the lights into the cars going by, and the one had the glowing eyes that stared back into him. The one about the couple who found their little private escape, male and female soldiers, in some warehouse, and they had encounters there that could be just as well explained away as being ghostly encounters. Let's see. I think that's the one we left off. Yep, we left off on that one. And then there's this next one. It's hard to say whether these are jinn, ghosts, or just overactive imaginations. But when you have what sounds like huge pieces of metal objects being dropped next to you, and you look and there's nothing there, you think something's toying with your perceptions of things. And especially when you have two people encountering it. There's another weird encounter that goes like this, and the experiencer wrote this. He said, "We had a generator Connex converted into an office. It was inside the cones during my water testing, and I heard the sound of someone walking on the rocks outside the Connex. I figured that maybe it was security coming by to check on things. I went outside, and there was no one there, and the sound stopped. The moon was bright that night, and there was light shining on the rocks from it. I saw shadows of what looked like to be spiked crescents zipping past my feet." I don't know what he means by spiked crescents. He says, "I looked up and there was nothing flying around. These things were zipping real fast. Later, I drove back to my LSA to get something. While I was backing up to park, someone started banging on the truck. I stopped immediately, thinking that I'd hit someone. I got out and I looked, and no one was there. This was about 4 a.m. Now, you know what this reminds me of? I don't know what you think of the television show Ghost Adventures with Zach Baggins and crew. I think that they're pretty legitimate. I knew a priest who had done some shows for them that said Zach Baggins is probably one of the most serious ghost investigators he had ever encountered. And he ran a very tight ship. So here's the question, or the incident. I just watched this the other night in an old rerun of theirs, where they were in, I think it was New Mexico, and Fair Orchard or something like that. It was Indian reservation land, or near Indian reservation. And it was out in the sticks, in kind of the deserty scrubland. And they were at this house, and there was supposed to have been what they felt was demon or ghost activity. And two of the guys were sitting in the car monitoring the computers, and they suddenly heard all this banging on the outside of somebody banging on the doors and the hood of the Jeep they were sitting in, a Jeep or a Durango or something like that. And they looked around, there was no one there. And it was while there was activity going on inside the trailer house on this property where a couple of the other guys were investigating. And this happened a couple of different times. So when I see that, this guy says that there appeared to be someone banging on his vehicle, and he stopped quickly, but there was no one there. This was about 4 a.m. He went from the bag farm to take more samples and to do a general check for water leaks. And between the last outermost bag and the Hescos, there appeared a small light dancing around. I walked over to that area, and it stopped. Then the new ROWPU site was completed. See, I don't know some of these military terms. Maybe some of you do. These abbreviations and so on for military. He said the site was completed. It was custom to get there before breakfast to start the generator. get the AC or the heater working in the lab or the office, and set out a clipboard at the distribution point before walking across the road to the DFAC for breakfast. And he said, as I left the office to go, I walked past the ROWPU connexes, and I saw a man in a white T-shirt sitting on his heels, leaning up against the connex. I started to go that way to see who it was and what he needed, but when I looked away and back again, he was gone. Nowhere in sight. In yet another possible encounter with the Jinn, an ex-Army security guard working at Karachi, Pakistan, in 2005, also had quite the bizarre story to tell like that one. He'd been hired by some affluent families to guard a street in a more upscale district of the city, and one night something decidedly terrifying happened to him that neither he nor the families he worked for could explain. According to one member of one of the families that had hired the guard, this account was told. Sometime past midnight, he was sitting on his chair when we were woken up by this screaming as he jumped over the gates of one house and entered in shock. Mind you that this was a man armed with a repeater weapon with 12 rounds, automatic pumping action, something similar to Arnold's weapon in Terminator 2 while riding his bike. This is what the person is writing. And upon inquiring, he kept on repeating the same story for 1 hour. He said that in an empty area between two houses, he first saw a rabbit hopping right opposite to where he was seated. In an instant, the rabbit sort of transformed into a cat. Whilst moving toward him, as this was happening, he tried to dispel this event as illusion. However, he was soon terribly shaken as the cat now started taking the shape of a woman. He clearly described the transformation, and at the point where he saw the half-woman entity, he got so scared that he started screaming, and his legs, which were jammed, were able to find the strength to jump into action over the 6-foot gate and into our neighbor's house. As far as I remember, he left his gun outside, and we had to go gather it later. Our neighborhood remained in a state of shock and fear for quite some time after this event. The guard had been with us for nearly a year, and after this, he was never the same guy again. Soon after, he swapped his duty roster with another guard. Now, there's a question. If you see something like that and experience something like that, what's it going to do to you? Is it going to change the way you do things, and certainly change the way you perceive things? Moving on, there's another story here. There was one retired remote viewer for the U.S. military named David Morehouse, and he wrote of his own experience in his book Psychic Warrior. And by the way, a few years back, I met at a party of my mother's. She had a bunch of people together, her friends, people that she knew through her business, at her house. And I met a fellow who was rather a quiet fellow, and my mom said, you need to talk to him. He's a remote viewer. And so I went and I talked to him a little bit, and he said that he had been with a program under the CIA that was a remote viewing program, and I've never had a chance to talk to this guy again. Told him I wanted to talk to him. This was several years. This was actually before I met Rainey, so this has got to be 15, 16 years ago. And I've never had the opportunity to talk to him again, but he talked about the program he was in as a remote viewer for the U.S. military. They do exist. The whole men who stare at goats, real thing. All right, according to Morehouse, he was stationed in Jordan at a desolate valley called Batain el-Ghul. And in order to take part in training exercises with Jordanian troops, the location is already spooky enough as it is, with the valley long said to be prowled by demons and ghosts, or Jinn, and even the name Batain el-Ghul itself having the sinister meaning of belly of the beast. Now, Jordanian soldiers have often told of seeing demons stalking out in the wasteland or even attacking people, and the whole valley was said to be a cursed place. But things could get strange for Morehouse when he sustained a head injury when he was accidentally shot in the helmet during a training exercise. and Morehouse would go on to claim that the injury had left him with the ability to see the Jinn, which he would report on with this report, which I'm going to read. And by the way, I remember that we've talked about this account before. I think it was a different account than this, but we mentioned this a few days ago. Morehouse is having been shot in the head accidentally, and it hit his helmet, and it left him a little loopy after that. So he writes this, Morehouse: "Somewhere in the night, my eyes opened to a surreal light outside the tent. It was like the light of an eclipsed sun, and it wasn't coming from any stove. It filled the night sky. The entire Batanangul and the hills beyond were bathed in the strange bluish-gray light. I walked to the edge of the bluff and stared into the valley. Dark figures moved effortlessly across its floor. Like apparitions, they poured from the rocks in various heaps and shapes and moved about the clusters of tents. I could hear muffled cries from the Jordanian encampment, and momentarily I thought we were being overrun by thieves or Israelis, and panicked, I turned to run for help. Colliding with one of the figures, I reflexively closed my eyes, except I didn't collide. I walked right through it. Turning around, I watched the figure disappear over the edge of the bluff." You know, I seem to remember, and you don't know what's what for television production, but Josh Gates' show, his first one, Destination Truth, he camped out in, I want to say it was Petra in Jordan, but they were up atop at some point and they saw some figure they picked up on the night vision cam. And this figure looked like an Arabic man. It had kind of a turban-y thing on its head. You didn't see detail, just shapes. And this figure just started to walk and just dissipated right in front of their eyes, and they couldn't find him. So it's interesting, some of the things that are seen, the things that walk around those areas. Now, there's another report of an alleged Jinn activity by the military in the Middle East. It was relayed through a commenter and suggested that many of the cases that are covered in looking at the Jinn could have originated with the Jinn. I'm trying to abbreviate here as I go. There was a commentator gave his own weird account, which I present in part here. Now, here's the account as I stumbled through the introduction of that, trying to get rid of half of the paragraph of information in front of my eyes. This guy writing this account said, "I was in Kabul, Afghanistan, on my 4th tour in the Middle East. At the time, I was a platoon sergeant of a PSD unit station at ISAF HQ. And that day, there was an intel that insurgents were looking to target our vehicles on our normal routes. There was only so many different roads to get to NK, and it was hard to change up the pattern. So I decided to try a completely new route that we hadn't driven before. I scouted it out using a map and a satellite imagery. And the road looked like it was paved and good, so we headed out. As we started down this new road, we saw it was dirt and not paved. We got stuck in the mud right as this tall wall started. Later I found out that the old British cemetery was on the other side. I get out from the vehicle, and I was knee-deep in mud that was not from dirt, but human waste and trash. It took us over an hour to self-extract from the mud. Worst part was I had to toss out my favorite pair of boots. Now I would toss that up to bad luck and coincidences, but around the same time, I was having some strange stuff going on. I had a room that I could lock and no one else could get in, and I would put something like vehicle keys or other important items on my bed and leave and lock my room, only to come back and they would be missing. I would start searching everywhere for the item and could not find it. I would leave again, and when I came back, they would be in the exact spot I had originally left them. Ever had that happen? I have, right here in this house. I would start searching everywhere for the item, couldn't find it. And then I found them where I originally left them. And this happened on several occasions. Later on, I was reading a couple of books on Jinn, Legends of the Fire Spirits, and another one I can't remember the name. And my experiences lined right up with their modus operandi. They like playing pranks and taking things from people, and they have a strong attraction and appear near human waste. So how about that? So are the Jinn real? Are they the actual entities that are described in Muslim lore, or are they something completely different? These were some military stories. Whatever the answers might be, these mysterious beings remain firmly entrenched within the cultures and traditions of these countries, and they're very real to many of those who live there. It seems very curious to me that if these are merely constructs of superstition and our imagination or our religious beliefs, that they should be seen by foreigners who don't share this history steeped in such myths. So what's going on here? Whether the Jinn are real or not, such cases present a curious clash between East and West, and a bizarre peek into what happens when we confront the powerful paranormal beliefs and mores of faraway lands. Indeed, perhaps when we come face to face with things beyond both our culture and our understanding, this is what happens. And so the big question is, once again, are the Jinn real? I think, in my opinion, we can get beyond that question. I believe they're real. And I believe they're as real as we might deem angels and demons and anything else in between. I think we've experienced them. I think the accounts that we read, a lot of people have experienced them. And a good point is made here that even people who are not part of that culture or part of that religious system or that belief system have also experienced them unwittingly, and their experiences match up with what the believers in that culture have put forward. And so this is stuff that we have to look at, and we have to weigh in. In a sense, this to me creates a sort of ad hoc scientific method, in that it's repeatable data within and without that culture's system of belief or that culture's superstitions. I think that says a lot for this. There's another big story I have, but we really only have about, well, what do we got here? We got about 4 or 5 minutes left, and I don't think I'll be able to do it justice. But you know what? Hell, let's give it a start, because we may dip one more time tomorrow and wrap our week with the Jinn and our study into the Jinn and our look at it, because I want to look at some other aspects that we may not have hit yet. So let's see where we get with this story. There's the Jinn of Oman, and this is Jordan. It's on the edge of the Arabian desert. There's one remote outpost that encounters evil spirits with disturbing frequency. Mohammed al-Hinai points to the spot behind his modest cement house where the inferno appeared 8 months ago, writes this author. He says, even today, as though the blaze might rekindle at any moment, al-Hinai stops short of his yard, halting at the edge to trace the shape of the green flames that hovered ominously for several minutes above the sand, and neither growing nor relenting. His fingers shake as he remembers and outlines for me their odd diagonal angles. Spontaneous fire under the scorching sun in this patch of desert might almost be expected, except that the blaze in al-Hinai's backyard broke out amid sand and rock on a cloudless night during the bitter chill of an Oman winter. And then there's the matter of the awful cackling that he heard echoing within the flames, and the pale woman in rags who stood atop this wispy cedar tree just before the blaze, who vanished as quickly as it appeared. Al-Hinai dashes back up his staircase and insists on closing the door tightly before continuing our discussion of the fire, because outside, hidden among the endless sand and shrub, the evil demons that plague the desert town of Bahla, Oman, are almost entirely listening. Now, he's a devout Muslim, He attended the country's premier university. He raised 5 children. He worked as a supervisor at a factory 20 miles down the road. Al-Hanai is not delusional, nor is he alone in this disturbing experience. Stories about confrontation with malicious spirits and balha and rampant speculation as to why they intrude so frequently here abound within this tight-knit community and have spilled out into the rest of the community. And you know what, folks? We're out of time. This is a long story, and I want to get into this tomorrow because I think this is a very interesting story that we can end our discussion of the Jinn on which we can end our, I don't want to end with a preposition, dangling. And so we'll also wrap up the Jinn in Friday night's show. So be here or be square, as they used to say. So I want to thank you for being here, for listening to this. Think about this stuff. It's pretty interesting stuff. It's interesting because it's outside the realm of the normal, of going to work, of buying groceries, of working on the car, etc. This is different. These are the things that exist in our world, whether or not our society or our culture has turned them off. So we'll see you again tomorrow night. 23-hour break. We'll be right back. Sit tight.